Hi everybody, Tony Howell here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about where to focus in an image. So you can see behind me I've got a nice winter tree with no leaves on it, and then there's a church here called Brentore Church. I'm on Dartmoor and it's a case of deciding where to focus for this shot, and I'm going to be talking about that throughout this video because it's something I think is important to learn. Actually, yeah, I think this is a fairly straightforward shot because the tree is the main focal point and the church tower itself is the secondary focal point. But I think because I'm shooting at 35mm, I think I'm going to just focus on the tree, and that should be enough for this shot. So no other special requirements. Often in a shot, it's just a case of focusing on the main focal point. Yeah, that looks pretty good, but I think I'm going to take another shot zoomed in slightly more as well. The tree is such a beautiful shape. Yeah, without the church in the distance, it would not be a shot, I don't think. It would just be too simple, but the tree is such a beautiful shape that it really balances out nicely with the church tower on the top of the hill. I'm hoping to go to 3 separate locations for this video, so that's to add to your viewing enjoyment and also put myself in different places so that I come across different challenges as to where to focus in a scene. It's going to be all about landscapes, obviously, because if you were taking a photo of a portrait like me now in the middle of this frame, you'd just focus on me and you'd probably want nice shallow depth of field. But for most landscape shots, there are several points of view. One of them is focus a third of the way up the scene, which is quite good if you're using a wide-ish kind of lens, say 20mm to 28mm, something like that. But if you're zooming in more than that, then you're definitely going to want a different kind of technique. So we'll explore most of those hopefully today. I just found this really nice tree which has got really nice moss covering it, so it's a lovely green colour with these roots as well. But the river in the background is so crystal clear with pebbles on the bottom that I really want to show that. So I want to make sure I get both of those things in focus, and I'm going to do it handheld so that you can see what I mean about where to choose the right focus point. If I'm back here at 40mm, I don't think the water is going to be in focus. Whereas if I get closer with a wider focal length, so now I'm at 28mm, now I believe the water in the background will be sharp as well. So I'm going to focus on the tree and choose an aperture like f11 just to hopefully get enough depth of field to get both in focus in one handheld shot. Now, how do you make a waterfall like this more interesting? Well, it's difficult. I can't get the whole thing in horizontally, and I like the reflection. I'm going to look for a foreground like one should. So I think these stones in the foreground could be good. Yeah, that's a lot better, isn't it? It's where to put it, probably on a third, something like that. Yeah, I think that's the shot there. I would use a polarizing filter as well to cut down some of the glare on the water. So what about this scene here? Now if you're at 20mm, everything's going to be sharp. You could focus virtually anywhere. But as we zoom in, you'll see 24mm, yeah, the same. 28mm, yeah, focus anywhere. At 35mm, now we're starting to get some bother. So where to focus now? If you're in a hurry, I would focus a third of the way into the picture. So on a landscape image, focus a third of the way up the frame from the bottom of the frame. So I would focus on this mid-ground here and then take the shot. Now that will mean that the distant rock, which is the main focal point of this image beyond the foreground, might not be pin sharp, but I don't think it really matters. What I would do is I would focus stack, so I'd focus once on the foreground here, take a shot, once on the rock and take another shot, and two of those shots combined should work together pretty well and make an overall sharp image. If in doubt, take 3. Right, now I've zoomed into 50mm, and this is where the fun starts because it's deciding where to focus. So obviously the main rock out at sea is a strong focal point, so I'd ideally like that sharp. But also I like this brown rock down here in the foreground, and that is not going to be sharp at f8 if I focus on the distant rock out at sea. So I'm going to try focusing a third of the way into the frame. So I'm going to focus there. Now I'm also going to do a focus stack, so I'm going to focus once on this foreground rock, the brown rock that I showed you earlier, once on the midground, and then once on the rock out at sea, which should be good for a focus stack to make all 3 really pin sharp. So if you were doing this shot handheld, I'd recommend focusing on the distant rock, because then the people will become sharp as well, and I think they're an important part of the image. But of course this brown rock in the foreground will be soft. Even if you're hand holding, you can do a focus stack, can't you? If you're careful, you can focus once on the foreground rock and once on the distant rock, and then you'll have a perfectly sharp image. This shot's fairly similar as well, so I think focusing on the rock out at sea, as it's the main focal point, would be the best for this shot. I tried a focus stack, but really the foreground's not that interesting anyway. So I'm here at Pedn Vounder. Fantastic beach, isn't it? And I've just got a shot lined up, and I'm using this rock here on the left-hand side as a kind of foreground to add a bit more depth to the shot. So there are several ideas for how you should get this in one shot. Well, you can use the hyperfocal distance if you want to use your phone and get an app that will actually tell you the hyperfocal distance for your lens for this shot. But I can't be bothered with all that, so I just take 3 shots. One on the foreground, one on the midground, one on the distance, and then I can just choose the best of those. So obviously in this circumstance, the one I take for the middle ground is going to be roughly halfway up the actual frame of the image. So this is the first shot I did, which is just focused on the foreground rock. Then the second shot, which was focused midway up the image. Everything apart from the foreground rock is perfectly sharp with that shot. Then I took the third shot, which interestingly I focused on tree and cliffs, and yet everything even right up to the foreground rock was sharp. So I only ended up needing 2 images for this shot, which is number 1 and number 3. Now the foreground rock is acceptably sharp, even with the focusing point being on tree and cliffs in the distance. But if you want it pin sharp, obviously it is better to take a focus stack. So the first thing I do when I get to a place is I look for a good foreground, and I found quite a strong one here with these beautiful sand patterns, and because the sun's coming from the side they're even more dramatic, so you've got nice shadows going down the edges of the sand patterns. And with Logan Rock and Tree and Cliffs in the distance, it makes a great shot, I think. So I'm going to do another 3-shot focus stack. I might not use all 3 images, but I'm going to take 3 anyway, because it's always best to take 3 and then at least you've got them in the bag. So even if you can't do focus stacking yet yourself, I think it's probably worth taking 3 shots just to make sure you've got everything right. Because if you get a classic shot and then you regret it later, it's pretty bad, isn't it? But if you get a good shot and you've definitely got all 3 in the bag, then you know you've got a perfectly focused shot to maybe do a large print of and hang on your wall. For this shot, which was taken at 31mm, I focused a quarter of the way up the frame to get the foreground sand pin sharp. Then I focused 50% up the frame, and then I focused on tree and cliffs on the horizon there. And again, interestingly, I didn't need the middle shot, so the one focused on tree and cliffs was enough to cover the sharpness 2/3 of the way down the image, but obviously the shot focused on the foreground sand did mean that the entire image could be pin sharp. So what would you do in this circumstance? Because I think the best thing to do is probably to focus on the distant cliffs for this image, but it is very nice to have everything sharp. I liked the previous shot, but I think this one's even better because of the lovely curve in that sand pattern right in the middle of the frame. I did a focus stack to make sure everything was pin sharp, but I ended up only using images 1 and 3 again, so it's quite interesting that you can focus on the cliffs in the distance and yet the whole of the 2/3 of the top of the image is actually pin sharp. But I'm glad I did a focus stack because now it's a really pin sharp image all through, which could be blown up very large on your wall. So my conclusions are, even if you focus halfway up the frame or 1/3 of the way up the frame, it's not a very satisfying end result. So even if I'm hand holding, I think I'm going to take a couple of shots at least so that I can possibly focus stack later on. I think focus on the main focal point, but even better, and I always seem to come back to this, I do prefer a good focus stack.